Welcome to Austrian Econ Theory. I'm Justin Merrill. In our last video we discussed what Austrian economics is and its principles, and we discussed what it is not. We differentiated it between libertarianism, which is a moral social philosophy, and an economic theory. And likewise, in this video we will discuss the difference between economic methods of production and political institutions. Now, as Peter Bettke, an Austrian economist from George Mason University, likes to say, institutions matter. So let's go into an understanding of the difference between these two, because most often people confuse or conflate the economic institutions with the political ones. Now, there are only two methods of production which can be obtained through an economy. There's the market process, or there's a collective socialist process. These two are different in the following ways. In an unhampered market economy, which is often called capitalism, you have private property, voluntary association and exchange, market prices, and non-intervention. Now, we discussed how market prices are essential for economic calculation, and that includes private property, because if you're not spending your own money or you're not using your own resources, you won't value it the same. Now let's contrast that to socialism. Socialism has collective ownership, redistribution and intervention, and collective or central planning. Now, there are many different ways that socialism could theoretically be implemented, but because of a non-market method of production, these are the core principles. Now, these are different than political systems. In some various political systems, you can have a constitutional republic, a democracy, a theocracy, where a religious leader is in charge, a monarchy, where you have a king, communism, autocracy, or anarchy, where you have no leader. The political institutions serve many different functions, but mostly in administering the rule of law. You could have any combination of the capitalist method of production associated with a political institution and a socialist method of production with the above political systems. You could have anarcho-socialism. There are people who think that government is evil, but capitalism is evil, and the only way to have a moral society would be to abolish private ownership of property and everyone would collectively share resources. How that would be implemented is something to think about, but because if you don't believe in force, who's going to force people who are consenting adults from exchanging property with another? But anyways, you can have social democracy, which is a common thing in Europe. You could have a social theocracy, sort of like maybe a Sharia law type heavy-handed religious order. About the only one that wouldn't make sense would be a capitalist communist combination, because communism is inherently based on a socialist philosophy. But other than that, you could have any combination. So when it comes down to rule of law and whether or not there are property rights, who administers the rule of law, who adjudicates disputes, these are political ideas. Now, it's a quick assumption to assume that in an anarchist system that there would be no rule of law. That would just mean that rule of law, rather than being administered politically, would fall onto one of these two economic methods of production. That is, law, courts, police could be administered on the market, or it could be administered socially without state intervention. If you have a tight commune of people who are like-minded, that would be pretty easy to do. Or a leader of the community, or you could have people vote for democratically vote for resolving disputes. I mean, these are just different ways to solve the question, who administers the rule of law? So, to differentiate, there's economic institutions, which determine the methods of production, and the political institutions, who administers the rule of law. Now, many critics of both socialism and capitalism will say a pure capitalist society or a pure socialist society are impossible. They've never existed in history. It is true that their existence in the purest forms are rare on the broader scale. Of course, you find counterexamples here and there for both cases. But on the broader spectrum, where does an economy fit in is a question. Now, for example, in America, the federal and state governments combined spend about 37% of our gross domestic product. So you could argue, if totally to the left on a scale of 0 is an unhampered market economy, and pure socialism would be 100% intervention, then maybe America is about a third or more of the way there. Now, there's a lot of adherents that admit that the capitalist method of production is most productive. It makes the biggest pie, but the distribution is unfair, and therefore we need redistribution and some form of collectivist ownership on arguments of public goods. So that would move, those policies and regulations would move the scale to the right, even if the economic power was not as heavy-handed as the state. If this pure spending, meaning that intervention in the economy could be more than taxing and spending, it can also be through regulation and confiscation of property, publicly owned lands, things like that, will affect how the market operates too. So what is the tipping point between a socialist economy and a market economy if there are very few pure examples in either case? Ludwig von Mises said that the tipping point was, is there a capital market? Is there a stock exchange? Can you buy and sell capital and have it be priced on the market? If so, even if you have very heavy-handed regulations and socialist interventions or methods of production, you still have a relatively market economy if you have a bond market and a capital, stock market.